Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. Checkmate. The word didn't float. It dropped like a guillotine blade, severing the heavy silence of the penthouse office. Kieran didn't flinch, even as the biometric lock on the heavy mahogany doors clicked shut with a sound of finality that echoed in his bones. He stood by the panoramic window, the city of Neoviridia sprawling below him like a circuit board of neon and malice, his reflection in the glass looking far calmer than the storm raging in his blood. He had spent 3 months infiltrating Vane Enterprises, 3 months binding his chest, 3 months drowning his natural scent in industrial-strength suppressants, all for this moment, to steal the ledger that would ruin Julian Vane. And Julian was sitting right there, in his high-backed leather chair, watching him. You really thought a cheap beta-mimicking patch could hide your scent from me, Kieran? Julian's voice was a low rumble, a baritone vibration that seemed to travel through the floorboards and up Kieran's legs. The CEO of Vane Enterprises didn't look angry. He looked hungry. I smelled the wild honey and distress the moment you walked into the interview. I hired you because you were lying. Kieran turned slowly, clutching the encrypted drive in his sweating palm. The air in the room was changing. The sterile, air-conditioned atmosphere was rapidly being displaced by something thick, heavy, and oppressive, the pheromones of a prime alpha who was done playing nice. It smelled of burnt cedar, ozone, and the terrified sharp tang of impending violence. If you knew, Kieran said, his voice steady despite the way his knees threatened to buckle under the alpha's pressure, then you're a fool for letting me get this close. Julian stood up. He was a towering figure, broad-shouldered in a charcoal 3-piece suit that cost more than Kieran's childhood home. His eyes, usually a cold, calculated gray, were darkening to a predator's obsidian. Am I? You have the drive. You have the evidence of my, let's call them aggressive acquisitions. But the doors are locked. The elevators are disabled. And outside that window, a hurricane is making landfall. No one is coming in. No one is going out. Julian took a step forward. You aren't the spy, Kieran. You're the delivery boy. You brought yourself exactly where I wanted you. Kieran backed away until his spine hit the cold glass of the window. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the sharp angles of Julian's face. You ruined my family. Kieran spat, trying to summon the hatred that had fueled him for years. You bought Solace Industries for pennies on the dollar. You drove my father to an early grave. I saved your father from prison, Julian corrected, his tone terrifyingly calm as he closed the distance. Solace Industries was laundering money for the triad. I bought the company, absorbed the debt, and buried the evidence to keep your family name clean. But you were too busy playing the martyr to see the truth. Kieran froze. The narrative he had built his life around, the villainous Julian Vane destroying the noble Solace family, fractured. Liar. Check the drive, Julian challenged, stopping just inches from him. It's all there. The payoffs. The debt restructuring. The receipts. Kieran's hand trembled. The proximity was overwhelming. The suppressants he wore were failing, burned away by the sheer intensity of Julian's presence. His own Omega biology, dormant and repressed for so long, was waking up with a vengeance. A flush of heat, sudden and agonizing, crawled up his neck. His breath hitched. Your heat is starting, Julian observed, his voice dropping to a whisper that scraped against Kieran's nerves. Stress-induced. You've been fighting your nature for too long, suppressing it with chemicals. Now, it's going to hit you like a tidal wave. Stay back, Kieran gasped, the command weak. His legs gave out, and he slid down the glass wall, clutching his burning abdomen. The scent of cedar was everywhere, filling his lungs, making his head spin. It wasn't just fear, it was a biological imperative. His body recognized Julian as a mate, even if his mind recognized him as a monster. Julian knelt before him, not touching, just looming. The restraint was palpable. A lesser alpha would have lost control already, fueled by the potent, sweet scent of an Omega in their first true heat. But Julian was a creature of iron will. I could take you right now, Julian murmured, bracing his hands on the floor on either side of Kieran, trapping him in a cage of expensive wool and muscle. Biology demands it. You're dripping with need, Kieran. You're begging for a knot to ground you. Go to hell, Kieran wheezed, though his body betrayed him. leaning almost imperceptibly toward the Alpha's warmth. "But I don't want your biology," Julian continued, ignoring the curse. "I want your submission. I want you to understand that you belong to me, not because of pheromones, but because there is no one else in this world capable of handling you." Suddenly, the lights in the penthouse flickered and died. The emergency red mood lighting bathed the room in a bloody glow. A mechanical hiss sounded from the vents. Julian's head snapped up, the haze of lust instantly replaced by cold tactical awareness. He sniffed the air, and his expression twisted into a snarl. Beta blocker gas. And gunpowder. The trap wasn't just Julian's. "Someone else is here," Kieran whispered, the realization cutting through the haze of his heat. "My competitors aren't as polite as I am," Julian growled. He finally touched Kieran, grabbing him by the lapels and hauling him up. The touch sent electric shocks through Kieran's fevered skin. "Listen to me. The security grid has been hacked. They're coming for the drive, and they're coming to kill anyone who saw it." "Why?" Kieran panted, fighting the waves of dizziness. "Why would they kill you? You're the king of this city. Kings get assassinated, Kieran. Especially when they refuse to sell weapons technology to foreign insurgents." Julian dragged Kieran toward the heavy oak desk. "Get under. Stay there." "I'm not a damsel," Kieran snapped, fumbling for the concealed switchblade in his boot. Julian looked at him, really looked at him, and a dark smirk ghosted his lips. "No, you're a trouble magnet. But you can barely stand. If they smell you like this, they won't just kill you. They'll tear you apart." The heavy double doors blew open with a deafening crash. 3 figures stormed in, clad in tactical gear, gas masks obscuring their faces. The silencers on their rifles were long, sleek, and deadly. Julian moved with a speed that defied physics. He flipped the heavy oak desk onto its side, creating a barricade just as bullets began to chew into the wood. He shoved Kieran behind it, covering the Omega's body with his own. "Give us the drive, Vane," a distorted voice shouted from the gloom. "And maybe we make it quick." "You have terrible timing," Julian yelled back, pulling a sleek, silver handgun from a holster beneath his jacket that Kieran hadn't even noticed. Kieran was curled against Julian's chest, the Alpha's heartbeat thundering against his ear. The situation was absurd. Minutes ago, they were enemies on the verge of a non-consensual catastrophe. Now, Julian was the only thing standing between Kieran and a firing squad. "Can you shoot?" Julian asked, his voice tight. "I was the top marksman in the academy before my family fell," Kieran gritted out, the heat making his vision swim, but his adrenaline was spiking, momentarily clarifying his mind. Julian pressed a spare magazine into Kieran's hand. "Good. Because I only have 12 rounds." Julian popped up, firing 2 controlled shots. 2 bodies dropped in the doorway, but more were pouring in from the hallway. The penthouse was a kill box. "We can't stay here," Kieran coughed. The beta blocker gas was mixing with the pheromones, creating a nauseating cocktail. "The vents. Too small for me," Julian said, reloading. "There's a panic room behind the wet bar. But we have to cross open ground." "I'll cover you," Kieran said, his hands shaking as he gripped his switchblade. Useless against guns, but he felt naked without it. "No," Julian commanded, the alpha tone hitting Kieran like a physical weight. "A move. You follow. If you stumble, I carry you. If you fall, I die protecting you. Do you understand?" Kieran looked up into Julian's eyes. For the first time, he saw the depth of the obsession. It wasn't just possession. It was a terrifying, all-consuming devotion. Julian Vane would burn the world down to keep a scratch off Kieran's skin. "Go," Kieran whispered. Julian surged forward, firing blindly to suppress the attackers. He grabbed a heavy crystal decanter from a side table and hurled it at the mercenaries, the glass shattering and creating a momentary distraction. He hooked an arm around Kieran's waist, hauling the smaller man across the room. Bullets shattered the panoramic window. Rain and wind screamed into the room, sending papers flying like white doves in a storm. The glass crunched under their feet. Kieran stumbled, his legs turning to water as a fresh wave of heat agony spiked through him. He fell, his knees hitting the shards. "Target down," one of the mercenaries shouted, leveling his rifle at Kieran's exposed back. "No," Julian roared. It wasn't a word, it was a primal sound, a disruption of the air itself. Julian threw himself backward, sliding across the wet floor. He didn't fire. He shielded. The bullet meant for Kieran's spine tore through Julian's shoulder. The impact spun the Alpha around, blood spraying across Kieran's face, hot, metallic, and smelling of distressed iron. Julian grunted but didn't collapse. He used the momentum to swing his gun arm up, firing a single, perfect shot between the mercenary's eyes. Silence fell, broken only by the howling wind and the heavy, wet rasp of Julian's breathing. Julian. Kieran scrambled over, ignoring the glass cutting his palms. He pressed his hands against the Alpha's shoulder, the blood seeping through his fingers. Get inside, Julian gasped, kicking the hidden panel under the bar open. The panic room door hissed, revealing a stark, concrete bunker. They tumbled inside, and Julian slammed the locking mechanism. The steel door sealed them in, cutting off the noise of the storm. They were safe, but they were trapped. Julian slid down the wall, leaving a streak of crimson on the concrete. His face was pale, sweat matting his dark hair to his forehead. The wound was bad, but not fatal, unless he went into shock. Kieran knelt beside him, ripping open Julian's expensive shirt. "You idiot," Kieran hissed, his voice breaking. "Why did you do that? You calculated everything. Taking a bullet isn't efficient." Julian let out a dry, pained laugh. His eyes were half closed, but they were locked on Kieran. The scent in the small room was suffocating now. The smell of alpha blood was triggering Kieran's instincts to care, to soothe, to submit. "I told you," Julian rasped, his hand coming up to cup Kieran's cheek, thumb brushing away a tear Kieran hadn't realized he'd shed. "I didn't buy your father's company to own it. I bought it because I knew they were coming for you next." Kieran froze. "What? I've been watching you since the gala 3 years ago," Julian confessed, his voice growing weaker. "You were so proud, so untouchable. When the triad turned on your father, I intervened. I played the villain because it was the only way to make you hate me enough to stay away. If you were close to me, you were a target. So you destroyed my life to save it?" Kieran asked, the anger draining out of him, replaced by a hollow ache. "And now," Julian coughed, wincing, "now you're trapped in a bunker with a bleeding alpha, and you're going into heat. This is a spectacular failure of planning." Kieran looked at the wound, then at the man. The lines of cruelty he had imagined on Julian's face were gone, replaced by pain and a desperate, raw honesty. The heat was clawing at Kieran's insides again. He needed release. He needed a mate. And the man bleeding out on the floor was the only one his soul seemed to recognize. Kieran reached for the first aid kit mounted on the wall. His hands were steady now. He had a job to do. "We're going to fix this," Kieran said, packing the wound with gauze. Julian hissed through his teeth. "And then?" Julian asked. Kieran finished the bandage and sat back on his heels. The air was thick with the scent of iron, cedar, and honey. The tension was no longer hostile. It was magnetic. "And then," Kieran said softly, leaning forward until his forehead rested against Julian's uninjured shoulder. "You're going to explain why you kept the engagement ring my mother sold to pay the lawyers." Julian went still. "You found it. It was in the safe with the drive," Kieran whispered. "You bought it back." "I was keeping it," Julian murmured, turning his head so his lips brushed Kieran's ear. "For the right time." Kieran shivered. The heat was becoming unbearable, a physical demand that blurred the lines of logic. He looked at Julian, wounded, dangerous, and utterly devoted. "The time is wrong," Kieran said, his voice dropping to a seductive purr as he straddled Julian's lap, mindful of the injury. "The place is wrong, and you are in no condition to claim anything." Julian's hands came up to grip Kieran's hips, his touch searing. "Try me." Kieran leaned down, his lips hovering inches from Julian's. "I'm not going to be your submissive little Omega, Julian. If we do this, if I let you in, it's on my terms. I run Vane Enterprises by your side, not beneath you." Julian smirked, the predator returning to his eyes despite the blood loss. "A power struggle? I love a challenge." "Good," Kieran whispered, closing the gap. "Because the game isn't over. It's just beginning." As their lips met, it wasn't a kiss of surrender. It was a declaration of war, a war where the only victory was total, mutual consumption. The storm raged outside, but in the silence of the bunker, a stronger bond was being forged in blood and desire. The trap had snapped shut, but for the first time, neither of them wanted to escape. And that is how the viper tamed the wolf, by letting himself get bit. If you enjoyed seeing Julian bleed for his obsession, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you fall for the man who ruined your life just to save you? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then, prompt image. Prompt. Masterpiece, best quality, high-res, 1.2. Korean manhwa style, semi-realistic, digital art. 2 men, BL, Yaoi, Man 1. Julian, Alpha, sitting on concrete floor, wearing unbuttoned bloody charcoal suit, dark hair wet with sweat, intense possessive gaze, broad shoulders, bandage on shoulder. Man 2. Kieran, Omega, straddling Man 1's lap, wearing disheveled white dress shirt, flushed skin, defiance mixed with desire in eyes, slim but toned build, hands on Man 1's chest. Background is dim panic room, red emergency lighting, steel walls, first aid kit on floor, cinematic lighting, heavy atmosphere, sexual tension, sharp focus, intricate details.